Hello, my name is Katie Brunner, and I am doing a critique of Adam Keyes' analysis of the rhetoric of CM Punk. I just wanted to start out by saying that I'm actually kind of glad that I got this text to analyze, being that I myself was once a fan of the WWF way back in the day, so the concepts that he was using throughout his writings were something that I was able to grasp quite well. So I appreciated that, and I just wanted to start out by just talking a little bit about some of the things I thought about his critique I found interesting or helpful. I thought that he did a really good job of contextualizing, setting up his argument for why this is something that is worthy of analysis, giving us details about what happened, who, and even for someone who is outside of the realm of understanding of this type of sporting event or entertainment event, he was able to set it up quite well so that the reader could understand. So I think he did a really good job of that, and he makes a good argument that pop culture is something that's become quite a huge thing in our society, and whereas wrestling itself has such an interesting, just an interesting way of being entertainment, while at the same time having this facade of a sporting event. So the audience is constantly questioning whatever is going on, whether or not it's real, if it's part of a ploy for publicity, things like that. So I think that's definitely something that is an interesting part of this particular type of entertainment itself. And also, the one thing that I thought was quite interesting is he makes reference to CM Punk's use of names, and I thought that was he did quite a good job of pointing that out, because we talked in lecture about how symbols are so important when it comes to rhetoric, and in this case, when it comes to the actors and their stage names are a symbol of the character that they play in the wrestling event that's going on at the time, and then their real life characters, hold their real life names. So I think that sort of symbol is actually a definitely a rhetorical device when it comes to analyzing this event. Moving along to some questions that I had as I was going through the reading. When I was looking at our readings that we were assigned, Brock and Scott actually talked a lot about critical impulse, and it made me wonder, specifically to you, Adam, what is it about this artifact that, as Brock and Scott says, cries out for explanation? When you were thinking about what you wanted to write about, what about this particular event called for an absolute need for analysis? So I was just curious as to why you chose this. And then another question that I had, and again from the Brock and Scott reading, they talk about how rhetoric is human effort to induce cooperation through use of symbols. And that led me to question what exactly, or who rather, is CM Punk trying to persuade? That's what I found myself wondering as I was going through and reading. Is he trying to persuade the WWE, the corporate members, to treat their workers better? Is he trying to persuade the audience members through a cognitive dissonance sort of argument, like you are the problem, this is why this exists? I just found myself wondering what his purpose was as far as persuading people. And then I was also wondering, as I went along, do you think that this text would be considered persuasive or actually coercion? Because we talked about in the lectures how the persuasive ability is convincing someone that is within their best interest to think in a certain way that would move them in your direction, whereas coercion, you present them with punishment or reward, so that they will do what you want them to do. And it seems as though, looking at the outside text, looking at the sources that you made mention of in the actual critique, and looking at what happened after this event, CM Punk goes on to win the title and then actually takes the title and leaves the organization, and that in itself being a form of his own type of protest. So I wonder if that isn't, in essence, a matter of coercion and him forcing the WWE's hand to whatever change then in actuality happened. So those were just a few questions that I had, just going through things and looking at it further. Moving along to some of the challenges I thought you might have with this particular text. Starting just in pure technicality, when I was looking, I looked at the video, but then I did find a transcription of it, and it is, well, it didn't have the actual number of pages, but it seemed to be quite short. So I wonder if that might actually be something that hinders you as you're going through and trying to critique it with the different units in this class. One other thing that I thought about while I was looking, like I said, at your critique as well as the outside critiques, the outside, what audience members were saying, things like that, is you mention in your critique that the fourth wall, and that's the argument that you make about the rhetorical event of him calling out the people by their real names and just making mention of all this backstage things that are happening. Being somebody that is familiar with, well, at least the WWF, how it used to be, that fourth wall breaking wasn't necessarily something that never happened. So this sort of event is something that has happened a lot of the times over the years for publicity and things like that, and I did hear those arguments being echoed in other just people that were looking at this event from an outside perspective. Specifically, Bleacher Report, sports news, as my husband apparently said, had made mention that this event by CM Punk was very reminiscent of certain rants that Steve Austin used to do in 1997, was specifically what they had said. And so, like I said, the audiences of these types of events were really used to the fourth wall breaking, not to that extent, but those sorts of antics that were always for publicity and things like that, to a certain extent of even when real things happen, like you make mention of the untimely deaths in your critique as well. For example, Owen Hart years ago, that actually, he really did die, but people had questioned the reality of that just because there was so much of that outside of even wrestling, so much of that going on that the audience never did know what was real. So that may be something that is a challenge there, people just not knowing whether or not it was real. Of course, you could make the argument that the fact that he had the audience questioning, that's a persuasive tool in itself. He caused the audience to think twice about what they were seeing, whether it was real or whether it was staged. So that in itself got them thinking about what he was saying. So that could also be to your advantage. Some things that I was really interested in seeing how they would develop, specifically in the Foss article, in the readings, it talks about having a research question in mind when you're going to do a critique. And I was wondering if you had a certain question that you were looking to be answered through all of this. As this is a very interesting thing to analyze, I was just wondering what exactly you were looking to specifically get out of analyzing this event. And if you hadn't thought of that question yet, I would advise you to read The Use of Formal Techniques to Simulate Creative Thinking method, and that's in, I think it's in the second or third page of the Foss article, and it gives 6 different methods that, as I was reading through them, I found at least 1 or 2 that I thought might work out, just to kind of help you wrap your head around a possible question that you would want to ask or answer in your research. Another thing, as I was reading through Aristotle, they looked at a section called, it talked about the available means of persuasion. So looking through the ending sections of that might give you a little bit more insight as to like methods of persuasion, means of what exactly maybe CM Punk was trying to do, and just looking a little bit more at who or what he was trying to persuade and what his ultimate goal was with this actual event. And then finally, what I really thought was interesting as I was going through, like I said, and looking at outside sources, looking at what people were saying, looking through your critique itself, I'm wondering if the real rhetoric of this event isn't in the context, specifically what happened after this event. As I said before, CM Punk goes on to win the title, and then he in turn takes that, and he does almost the sort of protest thing in which, like it or not, or whether or not people thought it was real, they got behind him. And a lot of people in these articles that I was reading were talking about the summer of Punk. I think that was what they called it. Whereas a lot of these really actual changes were happening within the WWE, whether or not they can be attributed to the specific event of CM Punk's text is left to be decided, but in essence, he was able to change something, and to look at maybe whether or not his rhetorical strategies within that text had something to do with it might be an interesting route to go. Also, just to look at the effects on the audience, as I was talking about before, but to be careful, because obviously the pitfall with effects is that those effects may not actually be 100% tied to the actual textual event. So, and then the last thing I found, when I first started reading your critique, I was wondering what the significance of pipe bomb was. And then so when I looked it up, and I found this picture that was a picture of CM Punk, and it talked about the power of him with a microphone, and he used this huge metaphor about a microphone in anyone else's hands is just a microphone, but a microphone in my hands is a pipe bomb. So I think that actually has quite a message about how he wants the audience to view him. And I don't know whether that picture or that concept about him came out before this textual event, but if it did, that set his whole credibility as a speaker up as something very, very different than if that weren't in the picture. So that might be in itself a rhetorical tool to analyze, and just kind of see how setting himself up as looking like someone who is the voice for the voiceless. If he really thinks that this is for change that needed to happen within the company of the WWE. And if that's the case, then that might be something worth looking into. I thank you very much for the opportunity to critique this, and I hope that my comments were helpful. Thank you.